by Laura Rousseau, Chapter 11, Part 2. The day of Dika's phone call, the year before Pablo came, was my 15th birthday, in May, just before rainy season, when my allergies were worse than ever, and I had to sit on my hands to keep from scratching my red, goopy eyes. We were celebrating, Mom and Juan and me. We sat at the kitchen table, drinking champagne beneath the fan that blew around hot, dry evening air. My mom always found excuses to pop open a bottle of champagne and celebrate life. The phone call came just after I'd opened my presents, a book of E. Cummings poetry and a moonstone ring. Just as we were about to cut the cake that said Feliz Cumpleaños, Sophie, I was holding the knife in the middle of a sneezing fit, getting my inner elbow snotty, when the phone rang. Mom answered. She listened a few moments and looked confused. "I'm sorry, who is this?" she asked in a few languages before she ended up back with English. After she hung up, my sneezing fit had stopped and the cake was cut and put on plates and the blackberry sherbet melting in pools beside it. Mom said, "Looks like my great aunt will be coming to live with us." "Who?" Juan and I asked at the same time. Mom hadn't had any contact with her family since she'd run away over 15 years earlier. I don't know, really. I think she said her name was Rika or Dika or Mika or something. Juan and I looked at each other and then at Mom. "She's Bosnian." Mom drew out her words, looked out the window squinting as if there were a faraway TV screen. "She says she married one of my great uncles in England, met him on a business trip he took to Yugoslavia. They got divorced a few years later. I think I remember her. I think one time she had Christmas supper with us when I was about your age, Sophie, and we drank bottles of spiced wine and ate loads of cinnamon biscuits together." She bit her thumbnail and stared at the melting purple sherbet. But that could have been someone else. At first, Mom figured she had only a vague, slippery memory of Dika because of the champagne. But the next day, she felt just as foggy. Over breakfast, she shrugged and said, "Well, whoever she is, relative or not, she's been through a lot, and she needs help." Over the next few days, Mom wrote to INS and filled out forms to say she'd sponsor this Bosnian lady. We searched Mom's single-worn childhood photo album for a picture of Dika, but found nothing that jogged Mom's memory. In the middle of getting the spare room ready, she suddenly said, "Hey, I think when we were drinking that spiced wine, she told me about her travels. My mom and dad were big worriers, hardly ever left our town, so this lady was refreshing, a free spirit. I think I wanted to be like her, fun and adventurous." Her voice faded out, lost its confidence. "I think." Mom couldn't call any of her relatives in England to check up on her alleged great-aunt's story. She had run away from England when she was 18 with an American guy she met there, a vagrant backpacker who her mother despised. Mom traveled with him to Nepal and Morocco and India, and while they were passing through Tucson on the way to Mexico, she found out she was pregnant with me. They decided to stay in Tucson, at least through the pregnancy, but then my father got busted for dealing acid and took off. Mom decided to raise me alone. When Dika arrived in the late summer, once the visa papers were in order, all she brought were 3 bags, one of clothes, one of toiletries, and one of glass, each in its own canvas duffel bag. Bags of newly collected glass filled her closet. Piles of glass were heaped on her dresser, which she'd moved to the center of the room where it got the most sun. Sometimes I caught glimpses of her in there, sitting in the worn armchair watching the glass, occasionally holding a piece up to the light close to her eye. In the prison camp, gazing into her red glass helped her make it through each day. And still, her favorite piece, it seemed, the one closest to her heart, was that original red shard. What it came down to was this. If she hadn't forced her way into my life, I wouldn't be here now, sitting in the fresh morning air by a street of strange artwork with Pablo sleeping beside me, an angel secretly playing with wisps of my hair and sneaking glances at the top of my nightgown in the shadowy shadow between my breasts. At midday, the sun was blazing, and people lined the streets, crowds of people, some carrying umbrellas for shade. There were old women wearing checked aprons and shawls folded on their heads, old men in woven palm hats and stained white button-down shirts and goatskin sandals, little kids in Disney t-shirts holding each other's hands, guys my age with baggy jeans and baseball caps, girls with tight skirts and halter tops. We had no umbrellas, so we pressed ourselves against the wall and waited for the parade and breathed in smells of roasting corn and sizzling meat. In front of us, a sawdust picture of a big white flower spanned the street, and farther on, a swirling medley of animals, foxes, deer, rabbits filled an intersection. Earlier, over scrambled eggs and refried beans in the courtyard, Dika had insisted on coming with us to see the parade, even though every few minutes more fireworks exploded. Mr. Lorenzo held her hand the entire time, and with every boom, I saw him squeeze it while her eyes tensed up and beads of sweat broke out above her lip. After each explosion, she wiped her forehead with a handkerchief and said, that was not so bad." And I breathed out in relief. I held Pablo's hand, and when no one was looking, Angel would slip his hand into mine for a moment, or I would let my arm graze his, or he would touch me with the excuse of pointing out something and let his hand linger a few beats. The crowd was pushing us into each other, and we let it happen. I loved the shade created just for a moment between his arm and mine, his face and my neck, my hair and his hand. And in this space, I could almost forget that he was leaving for good. The parade came into view. First, a big truck with the Moreno Jesus on it, the dark-skinned Jesus on the cross. El Señor de los Corazones, the patron saint of Huajuapan. He had black flowing hair and a red velvet skirt trimmed with golden tassels and covered with milagros, silver prayer charms pinned to the fabric. His skin was deep brown, darker than Pablo's or Angel's. Women walked behind him carrying umbrellas for shade, singing a hypnotic song about the Virgin and the Father and the Son, a mournful tune that I knew would be stuck in my head for days. Then I realized something that gave me chills. The parade was destroying the artwork. But of course it would get destroyed. What had I been thinking? That the people would just push their way through crowds along the sidewalk instead? That the pictures would magically stay there forever? I turned to Angel. They worked so hard on that. It's so beautiful. He nodded. The truck carrying Jesus inched toward us, followed by the women's wobbly, high-pitched song. I tried to soak in the flower and fox and rabbit and deer before the wheels plowed through. After the women passed, children in uniforms marched by, playing ear-splitting trumpets and drums. Then people from the sidewalks joined the parade, and children wove around their parents, screaming and laughing and kicking up the sawdust. My heartbeat quickened, my skin grew prickly, my head dizzy. At that moment, Pablo slipped his hand out of mine and disappeared into the crowd. "Pablo!" My voice didn't carry far with all the noise and music. And then I saw him in the street with the other children stomping on the colored sawdust, destroying every last trace of the pictures. I can't believe they're doing this. Angel spoke calmly. But I think that's the point, Sophie. What? I felt faint. I took a gulp from my water bottle and tried to keep my eyes glued on Pablo. To make something incredibly beautiful and then, before you even get to enjoy it, mess it up? He gave me a puzzled look. What about the memory? You'll have that. I glared at my reflection in his glasses. Memory isn't something real, something you can touch. But the memory changes you, right? It makes you a different person. I looked at him hard, then grabbed his sunglasses and looked at him even harder. His eyes looked very fragile underneath, very uncertain. My hands shook and my head felt as if it were swarming with insects, and all the people and noises faded, and Angel and I were the only ones there. Forget it, Angel! My words shot out like little bullets. Go to Guatemala and stay there and forget everything. I threw his glasses on the ground and pushed my way through the crowd, past the ruined sawdust pictures. At least Pablo won't stay here, I thought. At least he'll come back with us. I scanned the crowd in the street and saw him jumping up and down on a sawdust flower. In the book, when the little prince was about to go back to his star, he told his pilot friend to look at the stars and know that he would be on one of them, laughing. So for the pilot, it would be as though all the stars were laughing. I wondered if one day I'd see a guy in sunglasses with skin nearly the color of the Moreno Jesus, and instead of crying, I'd smile at the memory. Or if one day Dika could think of her house and garden before it was kaput and smile. Or if Mr. Lorenzo could think of his wife before whatever happened and smile. If we could ever wade through all that sorrow to find a little shard of happiness. I ran alongside Pablo and cupped my hands around my mouth and yelled, "Let's go, Pablo!" He waved at me, but he didn't come. His sweaty hand had slipped out of mine so easily. And then suddenly, Angel's hand was on my hip and he was turning me around and pressing me to him and whispering, out of breath, "Lime girl." I felt my breasts against his chest and I breathed in his soap, the detergent of his t-shirt, the sunshine on his neck. In the middle of all those people, next to the destroyed Virgin on the sliver of moon, with only a few tiny stars left on her cape, I could see why someone would want a moment of complete happiness, even if it wouldn't last. I pressed my lips against his neck and hung on.